Hello, and welcome to Paul's Thorn, a podcast that explores disability in the Bible, its stories, meanings, and impact on faith, with the goal of examining how Scripture portrays disability, challenge common interpretations, and offer fresh theological insights. My name is Angela Vincent, and thank you for joining. So, with the intent of sharing a little bit about what I've been up to in the 3 weeks since the last episode, I recently went to El Paso, Texas to visit family members. You'll notice that my voice is a touch scratchy at the moment. They were having a lot of sandstorms and a lot of dust in the air, and so I've been struggling a little bit with allergies ever since I got back. So I do apologize if that becomes an issue in today's recording. I have developed the habit in the last few years of trying to visit my family right around Easter time, with the intention of being more present in everyone's lives, and especially it's such an important time of the year. And so usually I'll try to go before, the festivities commence. So this time it was on a Tuesday, and then stay for Good Friday and Easter, and try to spend a couple more days after that so it's not so hectic to come back home. But just enjoy spending time with family, kind of be able to do those Easter activities together, like the Easter egg hunts or worship together, that kind of thing. But it's also fun. This year, I had the opportunity, and this is actually the second time I've done it, to climb Mount Cristo Rey, which is, technically not in El Paso. It's in Sunland Park, New Mexico. But it's a mountain near El Paso that at the top of it has a cross with Jesus on it. And so, that's the name of the mountain, is Mountain Christ the King. And so people will often do pilgrimages to the top of the mountain for Good Friday, or very often around Christmas time as well. And so, as part of our Good Friday this year, I went ahead and did climb the mountain along with a couple of family members. And so that was a lot of fun. It was a little more work than I was probably prepared for. I guess it's been a few years since I've done it. I'm a little bit older now too. Probably not as good a shape as I could be in order to do it, but it was a very nice experience to be around other Christians. I thought was very inspiring. As you climb up the mountain, they'll have different stations of the cross as you reach the top. There's also some shrines along the way to Anthony of Padua, and then St. Joseph as you go a little further, and then near the top there's a shrine to the Virgin Mary. That one was kind of neat, especially in that we discovered that over the years so many people have put flowers there at the base of the shrine. The beehive has developed, and so as you go up there to look, you'll see all these bees kind of swarming around, and if you look inside you can see the hive itself. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, it was kind of interesting to just people watch throughout the whole thing and to be inspired by some of the things they were doing. We saw a number of people who were actually climbing up and down the mountain without shoes on. So that was something, I was struggling with shoes on. I can't imagine how that must have been without. There were a couple of folks who were literally carrying crosses up and down the mountain. So that was exciting. I never did figure out who these folks were, but there were some women who I got the impression were religiously affiliated, who were wearing red shirts and then these skirts that had the Virgin Mary on them with some kind of bells. And so that was also inspiring. I saw a few other clergy members as well, kind of on that climb. But again, to be there on Good Friday, everybody's in good spirits as, we went up to the top. I did make a point of not praying when I got to the top, because I remember the first time I had gone up there when my mother was still alive. She was very concerned. Being raised apostolic, we were very much taught not to pray in front of statues or crosses with Jesus on them, with the fear that it would be praying to idols. And so she had, first time I was going to go climb the mountain, had very strongly asserted that I should not pray when we got up there. At least I should not bow down in front of the statue and pray. And so I've always been cognizant of that. And so I was this time as well. But to go up there and to be, again, with different Christians and to kind of be a part of that, especially on Good Friday, I thought was a very, very emotional and just a very exciting time. So I'm definitely glad that I had that opportunity. I will say one of the kind of negative things is we were standing up there kind of looking around too and taking in the horizon as we discovered this wall of sand that was coming our direction. There was a lot of joking during the week that, we were coming to visit Tatooine or living in Dune, that kind of comment. We were a little bit trying to move faster, I guess, trying to get down the mountain to avoid the sandstorm. But yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm glad I had that opportunity. At the end of today's episode, I'm actually going to include some audio of that experience. I did carry the microphone with me. At some point, I ran out of space, so I didn't get the whole thing, but it is an interesting opportunity to kind of hear some of the things that were going on during that event. So I guess to get started for today's episode, this is a continuation of our episode 2, where we were discussing how disability and healing were used by Jesus in his ministry in order to kind of spread the good news and to get people involved and to increase their faith. So just to recap, what we talked about last time was, again, how disability was used in Jesus' ministry. And in the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus frequently interacts with people who have disabilities and uses healing as a way to reveal his identity, demonstrate God's kingdom, and to challenge social assumptions about sin and worth. So last time we talked about 3 major themes. They were revealing his divine authority, demonstrating the kingdom of God, and then challenging sin and social stigma. So we're going to be picking up today at aspects 4 through 7 of how healing and disability were used in Jesus' ministry. So how I went about researching this episode was I went through the 4 Gospels and looked for instances where healing was mentioned, where different disabilities, and also, some of the different disabilities, for example, things like epilepsy or being deaf, mute, blindness. We'll talk about it in a bit. The woman who bled too much. I also include demon-possessed because even though I know it can be controversial in whether we're talking about demon possession or maybe what would now, in more modern terminology, be thought of as mental illness. But I did include those instances as well. So I had those verses, and then I also went and decided to ask ChatGPT the same question. Basically, the prompt was related to how Jesus uses disability in the Bible, and it gave me these 7 instances. And so taking those 7 instances or ways that Jesus uses disability, I took the verses that I identified and sorted them. And so sometimes the sorting is not as clean. Like today, we'll discover what was given as kind of the 4th idea is very similar to the 6th idea. And so there's a lot of overlap. In general, I guess there's going to be a lot of overlap because sometimes a story can reveal more than one aspect or be interpreted, kind of, I guess, different nuances of how it could be interpreted. For example, we talked last time a little bit about the idea of Jesus being accused of being demon-possessed himself and how that could be used to show how he was challenging sin and social stigma. But earlier in that passage, it very often was that he was doing that healing on a Sabbath. So that also, there's 2 different aspects of kind of one story. And so again, you'll see a lot of overlap, though I'm trying to, I guess, be as clean the delineation or separation of the different aspects. So, that doesn't, I guess, muddy the waters a touch. So we'll be picking up today with the fourth idea, which was to show how Jesus used disability and healing to prioritize faith over physical wholeness. So Jesus often emphasized faith over physical healing. One example of that we discussed last time, which was when there were 10 lepers that he healed, but only one of them, the Samaritan, kind of returned and was thanking Jesus and essentially thanking God. I'm not going to read that one again since we did read it the last time. But Jesus in that story commends this person's faith. And so the suggestion is that sometimes spiritual transformation is more important than physical healing. And so that's a nuance when it comes to faith. And I alluded to it earlier, but we'll be talking about in a little bit the idea of the faith to be healed. So when it came to this one, I saw the nuance as being, instead of being more specific to a person in the instances that were chosen, it was this idea of kind of the goal of emphasizing how the stories were used to emphasize having trust in God, emphasizing forgiveness and salvation, and also the importance of inner transformation and what happens to that person because of their faith or their healing. And so the examples that I'm going to talk about first are specifically related to the idea of faith, belief, and spiritual transformation related to healing. And so rather than picking very specific examples like I'll use when we talk about, faith to be healed, these were examples that were more not specific to that person necessarily, but cases where it felt like Jesus was making a statement in general to the people around him, as if he were teaching a lesson to everyone who was there to witness this. But also times when he was making kind of a commentary on the faith of the people around him when it come to witnessing these particular healing events. And so again, this is not very specific to the person. We'll cover that in a little bit. These are more kind of broad statements or broad stories that talk to the importance of faith. So the first one I'm going to read today is Matthew 17:14 through 18. The healing of a boy with a demon. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son," he said. "He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him." "O unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "Because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life." And the disciples were filled with grief. So the same story actually is told in Mark. So I'll actually read that one also. That's Mark 9:14 through 29. And again from the section, the healing of a boy with an evil spirit. And I read the second version of this also because it's interesting how in different versions you get slightly different nuances that add a lot of depth and flavor to the learning from the story. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. The man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "O unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? "Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for him who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer." They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. One of the things that's interesting to me about that one is the specific phrase when it comes to Jesus talking about or talking to the apostles as to why they were not able to drive out that spirit. And the phrase, "This kind can come out only by prayer." So different ways of looking at this, or some of the key meaning behind that phrase, may be related to faith and dependence on God being something that's absolutely necessary in order to have the authority to heal or to be part of this ministry. Some of these healings are so challenging that they require humble, prayerful reliance on God in order to solve them. But I guess truly it emphasizes that this is about God and what God is doing in the lives of these folks, and not necessarily about how exactly the apostles are saying the words or doing the actions. Also kind of interesting just to touch on a little bit is that what is described in here, a lot of folks might say sounds a lot like epilepsy. And so it's interesting to kind of think about how different folks have viewed that over the years as being demon-possessed versus a disability that folks have. And the last one I'll read today is part of this idea of faith, belief, and spiritual transformation related to healing. Mark 6, 4-6. And this actually goes a little bit deeper. And I struggled whether this should go in this section or not, but I think it's probably a good fit. And this is essentially about how Jesus was, or it's connected to how Jesus was treated when it came to basically his hometown. And so the section is a prophet without honor. And I'll be reading, I guess, more than Mark 6, 4-6. I'll start with, I'll read Mark 6, 1-6. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "Only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor." He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them, and he was amazed at their lack of faith. So under this idea of prioritizing faith over physical wholeness, I also included kind of a second sub-theme, which was large healing experiences as teaching opportunities. And so I'm going to be reading 3 different sections here that basically will talk about the healing, but that healing opportunity was used almost as a segue into Jesus having the audience in order to do a larger teaching event. For example, the Sermon on the Mount. So the first one will be Matthew 14, 13-21. Jesus feeds the 5,000. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the village and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So I guess it doesn't directly say that there was a teaching opportunity, but I can only imagine if you were sitting around having that opportunity to share a meal with Jesus and kind of listening to his wisdom and the things that he was saying, that was a great fulfilling moment. And so again, that started by first healing the folks and then kind of leading into how we feed them, and which is, I guess, another way of caring for people, and then into kind of the broader opportunity to share more. The next reading is also from Matthew. This is chapter 15, 29 through 39. Jesus feeds the 4,000. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way." His disciples answered, "Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied, "and a few small fish." He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were 4,000, besides women and children. After Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. The last reading from this section of large healing experiences with teaching opportunities will be from Luke. So this is Luke 17 through 26. And again, this is getting into the story of the Sermon on the Mount. From the sections Blessings and Woes. He went down with them and stood on a level place. A large crowd of his disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by evil spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all. Looking at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their fathers treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for that is how their fathers treated the false prophets." I guess it's interesting with the Sermon on the Mount, if you only had to read one story or one a small part of the Bible and understand Christianity, it would probably be the Sermon on the Mount. That by itself tells you everything you need to know about what it means to be a Christian and to have faith in God. So again, that was those two items: faith, belief, and spiritual transformation related to healing, and large healing experiences that provided teaching opportunities were what I had under the section of prioritizing faith over physical wholeness. So for the fifth idea, it's how Jesus used healing and disability to provide inclusion for marginalized peoples. So Jesus' interaction with disabled individuals was often countercultural, which is kind of a strange one to think of that, because I associated that with the 60s and the counterculture of that. But I guess anytime that you have an idea that's against what the mainstream folks are embracing, then it could be defined as countercultural. So again, his interactions with disabled people were very much out of line with what was commonly thought about people with disabilities. Very often, when we touched on it last time, how there was this idea of social stigma, and how if you had a disability, it was because somehow you or your family member had sinned, and so it had been brought upon you. So by including these marginalized folks in his ministry and in the story of the Bible, then it's an opportunity to include them in God's story and to show their value to God. So by doing that, again, by healing them and acknowledging their faith, Jesus shows that God values those whom society often dismisses. So under this idea of inclusion of the marginalized, I have three major sections. The first one is inclusion itself. And so the first passage I'll be reading is about how Jesus ate at the home of a leper. Think about how leprosy is discussed in the Bible. In history, there have been things like leper colonies where people who had leprosy were kind of pushed to the outside. It's interesting, the idea of he would choose to go into the home of somebody who had that rather than distance himself from that person. So I'll be reading from Mark chapter 14, verses 1 through 9. Jesus anointed at Bethany. Also kind of interesting in this one is that this is definitely, especially just having been Easter, kind of a story that we hear a lot about when it talks about Mary using her hair to anoint Jesus, that it would take place in the home of somebody with leprosy. Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. And as some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them any time you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." I guess it's funny because here they don't actually explicitly say that that's Mary. The same story, though, is told in the other Gospels. And so, for example, I guess in Matthew, they don't say that that's Mary. But in John, that they do say that's Mary. So in that passage, it says, this is from John 12, 1 through 3. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Mary served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took out a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So the other example I have of how he used inclusion in his ministry to support folks with disabilities is from Luke chapter 8. So this is Luke chapter 8, 1 through 3. And from the parable of the sower, though I won't be going through the parable itself. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. So it's interesting, just the idea that he has helped some of these people, cured them of evil spirits and diseases, and so they've now joined and are followers of him on his mission and support of his ministry, including financial support for him. So the next section I have, or the next, subsection I have under including the marginalized, is the idea of Jesus's willingness to heal folks. So again, often folks with disabilities were viewed as, or could have been viewed as being less than, and so his willingness to heal them was a sign of including them in his ministry, including them in the kingdom of God, and making them feel welcome and loved. So I'm going to read 3 different passages that sound very similar, based on the same event. But just to give you again, I like when there's different versions of the same telling. I think sometimes it does add a lot of context that might otherwise be lost. So from Matthew 8, 1 through 4. The man with leprosy. When he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." From Mark chapter 1, 40 through 45, in a section called A Man with Leprosy. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. I guess a couple things on that one. Were I in that same position, it would be really hard to not go share that news with everybody who listen. I know that if any time anything's good happened to me, it's just really hard, and especially something that's so miraculous, you'd want to make sure to share that with him. But I think it's a little bit haunting that it said that because of that is one more reason why Jesus was lonely. And I guess when you think about the loneliness of his mission and being here on earth to perform that and nobody quite understanding who he is and what that task that he has been sent out to perform. And so how othering, I guess, that could be. But also then the idea of maybe experiencing that. I know that times when I have had experiences where I've been, I guess, felt like I was othered or away from people or marginalized from people, that has increased my compassion. And it also has given me an understanding of what that meant to be in that position. So it's interesting that, obviously Jesus is all-knowing, but to have that opportunity also like a reinforcement of the human experience and what it means to be marginalized would give him the compassion to help folks more with that. And so the last of those passages about his willingness to heal people is from Luke chapter 5. So Luke chapter 5, 12 through 16, the man with leprosy. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing, as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So I did go and look up what sacrifices were to be made if one were cured of leprosy, and it comes from Leviticus 14. So Leviticus 14 then covers what exactly the sacrifice for having been cleansed from a defiling skin disease. And so it's a very prescriptive, long set of instructions, so I won't go through them, though it does involve blood sacrifice of some lambs, along with some grain offerings. It's interesting because it talks about guilt offerings as well, and sin offerings, and so I guess it kind of goes back to how often folks with disabilities, even when they're cured, were viewed as having been cleansed of a sin or a guilt that caused that particular condition to happen. I guess I won't keep begging the question of leprosy and kind of how this particular willingness to heal went, but it's just interesting to me, the idea that, again, Jesus was willing to heal folks with disabilities, willing to clean them. And again, it shows how he himself, through this act of helping other folks, was also marginalized too. So it's kind of interesting that way. So under this last section of including the marginalized in his ministry, I have the compassion of Christ as a subsection. And so it's interesting is, again, a lot of people didn't seem to have a lot of compassion for folks with disabilities. I mean, that's not an unusual thing even nowadays for folks to sometimes not have the correct amount. Well, I guess have enough compassion for folks with disabilities. It's hard to say the correct. I guess that wouldn't be correct. And so I have 4 different examples I'm going to talk about that specifically speak to the compassion of Christ. The first one is Matthew 20, and this is section 29 through 34. 2 blind men receive sight. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Just a social commentary on that one. That's kind of an interesting one too. All these are interesting to me, but that one, I think, is the idea of, he's walking through town, and then here's people just screaming at him, "Hey, pay attention to me, help me," and having that, even though that might be a frustrating situation, of having the compassion to heal those folks and just, what do you want me to do? And so they told him, and I guess that's interesting too, the idea of instead of just assuming how they wanted support for their disability, asking them specifically how they wanted to be supported, and then helping them that way. So the next passage is an interesting one, and a lot of people speak to this one when it comes to the compassion of Jesus. But will be a little bit longer passage, and so it'll be two readings from John 11. So from chapter 11, under the section Jesus Comforts the Sisters, starting at 17 through 37. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with him also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So I won't continue to read, though we do learn in subsequent verses that Jesus does raise Lazarus from the dead. And so that's interesting, though, that I guess to me, it feels almost like they were blaming him for not having been there when Lazarus was sick and not healing him, which is kind of interesting from the standpoint of, he doesn't have to heal anybody, but much less coming specifically to heal him, and kind of being blamed for not being there was probably a very frustrating experience. But it also points to, again, his compassion. And they always talk about that being the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. But to have compassion, and the sisters, also the loss of his friend, again, it shows Jesus' humanity. It shows his humanity, his compassion, and his deep willingness to help folks, as well as, I wonder sometimes too when he wept if he was, he knew he was going to, well, I assume from what he said earlier, he intended to raise Lazarus from the dead. But if his weeping was caused solely by the loss of his friend, or also maybe the way his kind of friends had such faith in him, but also the way they had laid blame at his feet for not having, been there earlier. And again, this is conjecture on my part. I obviously don't know what Jesus was feeling or what was going through his head when he was weeping. I guess also probably with the autism, I probably don't know what a lot of people are thinking when they're doing some things. But again, it speaks to his compassion as a human being. And so the last verses I'll be reading under the subsection of the compassion of Christ is from Luke chapter 22. And this is a little darker one, and I guess it could be argued whether this is about compassion or not. But I think it speaks highly that even in the midst of what was a very dark time for him, he did heal somebody to help them out. And so this is actually when he was being arrested, and Peter attacked the folks who had come to arrest him. So from Luke 22:47-53, under the section Jesus arrested. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." So again, even in a time when darkness is reigning for Jesus and he's getting ready to enter tribulations of crucifixion, then he still stops and he heals this person who had obviously come to do him harm, or was not coming in a good spirit and did not even ask to be healed. But he does heal him out of the compassion of his heart. The sixth section today that we'll be talking about is symbolic and spiritual healing. So physical healing is often linked to a spiritual, deeper truth. So very often, for example, having faith to be healed or faith in God, and using healing as a way to receive and proclaim God's truth. So in this section, we'll have two subsections. The first is faith has healed you, or the faith to be healed. And so this is one, again, that ties, I think, closely to 4. So this was a hard one to kind of separate out. But these are cases in the Bible where someone's faith is specifically called out by Jesus as being why they were healed. And all these kind of fall into that general category. And so the first one is obviously a very famous one. And there's multiple versions of it, but I'll read the version from Matthew 8 on the faith of the centurion. So Matthew 8, 5 through 13. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed and in terrible suffering. Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was astonished and said to those following him, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, go, it will be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that very hour. The next one shows up multiple times in the Gospels, and it's the woman who was bleeding. And so I'm going to read specifically from Mark chapter 5, 24b through 34. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Yeah, it's just so much faith that even touching his clothes, like you wouldn't think of that as something that, was necessarily a part of him, but so believing in him and what he was capable of doing, that just that alone, she felt it would heal her. And when she did do it, Jesus felt the power coming out of him and knew immediately that somebody had touched him or been healed by him. So that's always an interesting one. So the next reading, like the other two previously, also it shows up more than once in the Gospels. And this is the faith of the Canaanite woman. It's also sometimes called the faith of the Syrophoenician woman. So from Matthew 15. Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28, in the section, the faith of the Canaanite woman. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. I guess that one touches on a couple of interesting things. One is not to be critical of Jesus, but there's been times where I felt like that was a very harsh response. But I guess it is important to remember that at that time in his ministry, He may not necessarily have been thinking of the Gentiles. He was primarily focused on bringing the good news to the Jewish folks. But the other part that's interesting to me, and mostly this is because I'm a dog lover, but the passage specifically about, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Yeah, I know again in this passage, the Gentiles are the dogs. But it's also interesting because for sure I know that my dogs have been a little bit of vacuum cleaners when it comes to kind of picking that off. So it's a very good visualization, I suppose. But also how quick she was to kind of come back when he referred to the Gentiles as dogs with a response that was very clever, and clever enough, I guess, that he was impressed by her and went ahead and healed her daughter. And so the last passage I'll be reading under the idea of the subsection, faith has healed you, or the faith to be healed, is from Mark 10, the blind man Bartimaeus. So from Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52, blind Bartimaeus receives his sight. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. The next subsection I have under the idea of physical healing, or symbolic and spiritual healing, I suppose, is the idea of it's not the healthy who need a doctor. So I'm going to read 2 of the 3 different passages that talk about this particularly, but it's not directly necessarily related to healing, but I think it teaches a good lesson about grace and mercy, and also, I guess, the need for humility. So from Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13, the calling of Matthew. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." I'll read the Mark version of this as well, again to add a little bit of depth and color to the story. From Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, the calling of Levi. Well, I guess point out that Matthew and Levi are the same person. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Interesting, too, is the idea that obviously everyone is a sinner. And so Jesus is being called to help everyone. It's just a matter of, I guess, whether or not people see the sin in themselves, or maybe have the humility to see that they're also sinners. Just to kind of digress a little bit on the Matthew versus Levi issue. And apparently Matthew is the Greek version of the Hebrew name Levi. And so for the final section of the 7 sections that we've been covering in this podcast episode and the previous, is the idea of Jesus using healing and disability to redefine strength and power. So Jesus' ultimate act of healing is his resurrection, which overcomes the greatest affliction, which is death. His mission was not just about temporary physical restoration, but about ushering in a new creation where all suffering and disability will be redeemed. So from Revelations chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, the New Jerusalem. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. The old order of things has passed away. So the idea again of the old order of things and no more pain, suffering, mourning in the new order that God is promising for folks. So I guess as a recap, covering this episode and the last episode, and the idea of how Jesus used healing and disabilities ministry, the 7 major themes we had were using it to reveal his divine authority, demonstrating the kingdom of God, challenging sin and social stigma, prioritizing faith over physical wholeness, including the marginalized, symbolic and spiritual healing, and finally redefining faith or redefining strength and power. So it's funny because it seems like I covered quite a bit, but also in many ways felt like it just touched upon the issue, and there's so much more to it. Obviously, I guess that's why I've created this podcast, is to kind of go into even greater depth. So in 2 weeks, we'll have our next episode. And this is, I guess, partially inspired by the reading that I've done during Easter, and especially after Jesus' resurrection and appearing to Mary Magdalene, and then the walk to Emmaus, and then making himself known to the apostles. It was thinking about how his ministry of helping folks with disability and the healing of different aspects of his ministry was then passed on to the apostles, and how they used some of these same things to continue to grow Jesus's ministry and to grow Christianity. And so I thought it was kind of fitting to have this conversation next, or to do that as the next episode, moving towards Pentecost, and to kind of look at those early days right after Jesus had died and been resurrected and was passing his ministry on to the apostles to continue it while he went to heaven. We'll be looking again at the end of the 4 Gospels, and then mostly, I guess, into the book of Acts to kind of have that discussion. Thank you again for joining me today as we talk about some of my favorite subjects to discuss of God and Christianity, and then also disability, something I always like to talk about. It's always a pleasure to have that opportunity to learn more. I know that when I do the reading for this podcast and kind of think through the ideas, that I develop a more rich understanding. And so I'm hoping that you do as well by listening to this podcast. I also hope that it draws you closer to God, or generates interest in you in reading the Bible and learning more about God. So again, I'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, if you'd like to reach out via social media or email, I always appreciate that. I'm on the usual social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. There's a Reddit out there. It's not very populated, but if folks want to use that or make comments. Again, if I've missed something, or you have something that should be shared or added to this discussion to help folks get a deeper understanding, or even a contrary opinion, I'm open to kind of listening to that too. I'm not guaranteeing that I'll always take it into consideration, but I will at least listen to it and give it some valid thought. So again, thank you. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful week. See you in 2 weeks. Paul's Thorn, Episode 3. Copyright 2025 by Angeli Vincent. All rights reserved.
Yeah, to use the